Kia ora, my name is Michael Reynolds. I feel quite privileged and honoured to be invited to come along and speak to you guys today. I too probably sat and wondered why I had been invited to talk at Fail Club. Um, but I think one of the first questions that sort of came to me was, is failure even a thing at all? Um, and I've decided it's not. So, how I ended up here. Um, as Erica has already mentioned, I started a project called A Brave New City. It was born out of the earthquakes in Christchurch. I was living in Central City, Christchurch at the time, inside the army cordon zones, which was an interesting experience, but one that I'm actually and always will be thankful for. I got a different sort of perspective on what life was like in the Central City after the earthquakes. And touching on what Preston and Fiona have talked about, it offered me a different perspective um, on what the possibilities were in an urban context and what could be created and what was the human experience of actually living in a space like that. And so I created, for some reason, a project called Brave New City, which was all about public engagement. So creating opportunities for people to share, I guess, the emotional and spiritual aspects of what they wanted to experience in a city, rather than talking about the actual things that we build and, invest lots of money in. So how do we want to feel in a city? What does the experience of living there look like? Um, and so that was pretty fun. And it sort of opened up, I guess, a level of creativity in me that I don't think that I've ever experienced or had experienced in my life prior to that, which gave birth. So how I did at Brave New City was I created all these little postcards with speech bubbles on them to represent people's voices, and just went to spaces and people could write down whatever it was that they felt, that they wanted to feel living in the city, which was, I guess, in hindsight, my own version of share an idea, but from an emotional and spiritual sort of point of view, which has become a really rich resource, actually, in terms of the work that I've done post that. But in terms of my creativity, I met some wonderful people, and one of them, Emma, and I came up with this idea of creating this newspaper called the Parallel Press. And so we kind of took this science fiction theme of what would it be like if we lived in this post-earthquake context of Christchurch and we're walking down the street and we came across these voids where voices from parallel versions of Christchurch were able to share information about what their experience of dealing with particular issues was like, in their version of Christchurch. And all of the issues that they were sort of dealing with were ones that were coming up as part of the engagement process, and I guess in the wider scheme of what people were sharing of living in Christchurch post-earthquake. We only ever did 2 issues. I think we printed quite a few copies and left them in cafes. We don't know if anyone ever read them other than ourselves and the people that we made read them, like our families and friends. Still not a failure. And so I actually took a break after A Brave New City, which still wasn't a failure, and used a lot of the information and I guess the things that people were sharing sort of during A Brave New City to create a project called Roimata Food Commons, which is still going today. So I moved into a part of Christchurch, Woolston. The day after I moved in, with my 2 young girls, I walked into this park across the road called Radley Park. I was like, wow, this place is massive. And there's no one here. And there's a playground, and there's just grass, and there's paths through it. And sort of over 6 months of observation, noticed that really people just use it as a thoroughfare to get from one side of the park to the other side, which then gives them access to shops and what they feel like they need on this side, and then go back again to where their homes are on the other side. And I'd kind of gotten into some ideas around food resilience and food security and how we can use food as a universal bonding sort of tool. And so created this thing called Roimata Food Commons. So we've got a 2.6 hectare piece of land, which has never, ever, 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 ever been built on in its life. So it actually has organic soil, which means that we can grow whatever we want in it and make it available to whoever wants to pick it. So we've got nearly 100 heritage apple and other fruit variety trees in the park. We're just about to start construction on a community garden, and we've also added over 1,000 native plants along the banks of the Apawaho, the Heathcote River. And this feels like really good work. Definitely not a failure. So that's Radley Park. After we've been doing stuff to it, yeah, so we're transitioning some of the orchard areas that we first planted into food forest. We're using, I guess, basic ecological principles as the basis for what guides our actions. And I'll touch more on that soon. And lots of different people of different ages, from different backgrounds, with different philosophies on life, come and get involved and plant trees. And some of them, it's the first time in their life that they've ever planted a tree of any kind. And seeing the joy on their face when they do that is a huge, huge payback for me in terms of creating the opportunity for them to be able to do that. So definitely no failure involved in that situation at all. And because I guess maybe similar to Preston and Fiona and Erica, I find it pretty hard to focus on one particular thing at any one particular time. And realizing that there's never only one level to this work that we're ever doing. There's always multiple layers and levels that we can sort of be looking at. You're right, you need a drink. Rather than just operating at a Woolston sort of Christchurch level, I've decided to jump into looking at it from a New Zealand perspective as well. And so I'm working with a group of other people dispersed from communities all across New Zealand, length and breadth, and different cultural perspectives, different social experiences, all sorts of things, on co-authoring an Aotearoa Food Resilience Charter as a tool for moving past the roadblock that climate change is currently putting in front of us, and a lot of the language and emotions that we wrap around all of that. So that's really exciting too. Haven't failed yet. So what does success and failure look like? I think what I've realized is that success and failure are really only a very, very, very momentary judgment of something that we've done or we're doing, and that there's a huge potential in us actually just recognizing and holding that and moving past it as quickly as we can. Maybe even so quickly that we don't even feel like we've succeeded or failed at all, and that we're actually looking at life as being a journey or a process that just has different events. And again, touching on what Fiona and Preston have already said, that there's so much learning in everything that we do, that sitting in a way of judging ourselves on what we do is probably one of the least productive things that we can actually do. It can stop us from doing some really cool things. So just embrace the fact that there is no success or failure. It's just a moment. So what have I learned? Probably a lot of things. I think the way that we do our work, which is quite heavily in this kind of community context, but probably also organisationally as well, really heavily project focused. And I can't help but think that by working on projects, we're actually opening ourselves up to that process of judgment more than if we looked at things in more of a continuum, because we're automatically going to sit in a way of saying, it starts now and it ends here. And when it ends, I'm going to need to do something else. And what I do next depends on what I do for the next 12 months, if that's the length of my contract. Whereas I think we can step out of that and look at the project as maybe a really small segment of just our life journey and a more of a continuum, and not think about whether what we do now impacts so much more on what we do before or after that. And I think it also encourages us to actually predetermine what success and failure actually look like, rather than living in this in a really organic way. That's one of the things that Roy Matters really taught me, is that it's really easy when you set up a project, especially that's going to invite community in, and you create a working bee for us. For example, we do a lot of working bees. We shift a lot of mulch with wheelbarrows and spades, and it's actually really, really, really good work, because you learn a lot about yourself and other people through doing manual things that you don't have to think about. But maybe only 2 or 3 people would turn up, which means that we may only get a quarter or a third of the pile of mulch that we wanted to get shifted on that particular day done. But you learn pretty quickly, actually, that just embracing the fact that there's 3 people that have given up their time to come along and invest their time and energy into the thing that you're hosting is way beyond what success we could even paint success to look like. And the relationships that actually develop out of that carry over well beyond the length of any sort of project or timeframes that we put on anything. So I think there's something in that as well. And I think as well, and this is probably more relevant to maybe the work that I'm and the conversations that I'm involved in, but I think there's probably other people here in this as well, is that when we invite a sense of crisis or urgency, it very much ushers us into a place of judging as well. And I think how we sit around this climate situation at the moment is incredibly unproductive. And if we could talk about, I guess, the positive aspects that could be generated out of, I guess, the solutions and movement towards solving some of these long built up issues within our society, that could actually change our perspective on things quite markedly. So my learnings: always act from a place of passion. If you're not passionate about something, then you're not truly invested. It's going to be pretty, if you are going to sit in a place of success and failure, it's going to be pretty hard to feel successful if you're not personally and emotionally and spiritually invested in something. And again, something that Fiona and, and Preston have touched on: hold all we do lightly. So again, like Fiona said, we're not our projects. Our work is not ourselves. We are separate from the work that we do. But we're also not going to save the world through the actions that we all hold and take on ourselves personally. Change is only ever going to happen in conjunction with other people. And so I think we can do a lot better job of holding our part in all of the solution stuff a lot lighter, which definitely works in terms of not feeling like you've failed. There's a ton of learning and reflection. And that's not waiting until something's finished in order to sit down and judge whether or not it succeeded or failed. It's actually sitting in a place of building reflection into your everyday practice and it's more about recognition, checking in with yourself as to how you feel about the work that you're doing, and how it's adding to your life and to the relationships that you hold with people that are in your life too. And simplicity. Learn from nature. So I wrote this down on the slide and sent it to Erica without really probably thinking so much about why I thought about it in the first place. But actually listening to Preston and Fiona tonight, there's something in this around the recycling or the continual cycle of energy being generated on our planet. Nature doesn't do waste. Everything that gets created in nature is always recycled or upcycled into a different purpose, different way of being able to be used. The energy is never lost from the system. It's always reinvested. So when a project, I guess, ends, there's real value in learning what it is that has worked and what you can take from that project and reinvest into something else and not waste that period that has gone before because of a need to be able to define whether it was a success or a failure. And where that's led me is to probably go more balls out than I have ever before. And one of the things actually that came up for me when Erica first sort of asked me about this was one of the actual learnings that I've taken from this is that bureaucracy kills really good ideas and really good people. That there's an opportunity here to step outside of those bureaucratic frameworks and act as independent sort of catalysts with all this passion and learning and experience and non-judgmental stuff that we've learned over the course of our lives, to form relationships with other people who are doing the same thing to create the action that we need to see in the world. So if I'm going to say that in front of a whole bunch of people, I literally launched myself as an independent food systems change catalyst at the end of last week. So it's a real thing now. So if you've got any work, then let me know.